back for another thrilling edition of ideas. What does that even mean? I don't know. You have to watch it because I made you as an assignment. So, like, it might as well be remotely entertaining to start. Anyway, so what I thought I'd do today, whatever day you're watching this, it's probably cold and miserable outside, is entertain the day with where an idea comes from. I get asked this all the time, where we go from idea concept into the actual translation of the idea into a real thing. So I was researching stuff for class. I do that at times, or work. This is something we'll experience later in the semester. It's called Lit. But as I was going through this, minimize me. I don't care about me anymore. So I noticed this thing. And so when I hover over reactive properties, it actually scales out and shows like this is the thing we're talking about. Right, pointing. That's the thing right there. This thing, and it shows where it is over in the document. And I said that is really effective. I have a tool that shows code. It's called Code Sample, but it doesn't do that. So let me hackstheweb.org for our current one. There it is. Right there. This is our code sample thing, and it's miserable. It's so sad. And if I inspect source, I can see there's code. It's called a code-sample tag in this case, and it's got a shadow root, which is magic, but the template element is just this. It's just a bunch of text. So the implementation of it is really nice because then if you're editing HTML, you just put a bunch of stuff in there and you magically get a little code editor. So that's cool, but I want to be able to highlight like maybe this yarn add command, right? Because maybe I'm not doing this about hacks. I'm just this is an example of an element we've made that we've used. Now, if I actually dig into the guts of how this works, I've got HTML. That's a poor example. So we'll look at what the lit one does. So when I right click this code in lit, we can see they don't have HLJS. They have something called code mirror line. Sounds helpful. And then if I look at this code mirror line, there is a Tor highlight class. And let's minimize that. So then when I hover this, and it's the one in question, you can see the DOM lights up there, and we see Tor highlight active, gives it a background color of yellow, height in EMS, and what is that, width in 24 CHs, which is for characters. It's the size of the 0 character. Fun fact, didn't know that before. So when I go away, it goes away, right? So there's something pegging these two together, but the more important thing is it's highlighting that line. Now, what's unfortunate, in my implementation is even crappier than this as far as the library I use. We'll show in a second, but it's got Tor highlight here, but magically it's highlighting these other lines. I was like, well, that's a little bizarre. It's updating this thing with a very static height, right? Is height 5.4 ems, which is a measure of unit. And so it's all relative to base 16. So basically take 5.4, multiply it by 16 pixels. That'll give you your ems in this case. However, that's not very helpful because I could set an event listener, hover state, something of that to detect that I've entered this. And you can see it's updating even when I'm just moving around, which is a little weird. It's probably a peg to mouse move. Anyway, the unfortunate thing is it's not actually highlighting those 3 lines. It's drawing a box and then positioning it to make you think it's highlighting those lines. Now, the other reason I know that this is the case, if I select Tor highlight, we can see it's absolutely positioned and it's actually there. You can see it points in the DOM. It just doesn't have a size. So if I give it a width of any value, it will start to magically grow just in that space. Now, this is, again, the unfortunate aspect of this. It is a hard-coded height and width. So I said, all right, there must be something behind this. And I asked in the lit whatever this is, Discord channel. And someone that worked on that website said, actually, it's hard-coded logic that knows the range in question. Oh, I hate hard-coded things. So link me off to this source, right? And so this is the more or less gobbledygook But effectively, they programmed a Tor range. You can see we have a constant object here, and they've said, okay, start at line 3, end at line this, right? And they've actually had to set it, in this case, for when you switch between TypeScript and JavaScript, which I'm not going to get into TypeScript this semester, but you can see that they have to highlight a different series of lines as a result of switching between those languages. And this is really unsustainable because what happens if you update the documentation for that example? You now have to have someone that knows how this was made to go and update this thing. Probably you, because you're the first person on the job and you get to update this fun thing that no one understands anymore. So what we use instead, I'll show you partly the solution come up with so far as I work through this. We use a library called Highlight.js. And so Highlight.js, I go on Google, Highlight.js is syntax highlighting for the web. Basically takes blocks, and when you pass in code, I believe they have examples somewhere, usage, here we go. I think when you pass in code, it performs this little highlighting automatically. Now, it's a really horrible example that they have set up. I'll show you what my sample code is. But so I can change the theme of it. We can also do detection for different languages. So in this case, CSS, right? This is color coding CSS on the fly. Or we've got, in this case, HTML, PHP, right? See how the if statement and this string variable are color coded. So it's able to detect what it is. It's even able to change on the fly. And so this is color coded, I understand poorly, JSON versus HTML. And you can change the theme or the way that this is presented. So their API is pretty robust, and we've used it in the past. So I ended up looking to say, okay, I want to be able to not just highlight, the issue that Lit has here, where they had to just kind of say, like, highlight the geographic region. I wanted to actually highlight the lines in question because I want to point out to you all, this is how this works, right? And write content that has things you could select and see, this is what I'm talking about. So I dug into their API, which is well documented. They use a project called Read the Docs, which was linked off of their documentation. This website is horrible looking, must say, but it's a very effective, simple little library. So we dig through the docs, we read their API is well documented, unlike mine. Ouch. So the thing I was looking for is not what the base functionality is, it's do they have plugins? Now, and the reason I got to look for do they have plugins was if I go to hackstheweb.org again, right, and we find, got to have code blocks. There's a better one. All right, so I've got this code block here, and the way that the code block is used is if I looked at the HTML, we see there's a template tag, and it's just rendering meme maker. So it's this special tag. Let's not worry about what it is. There's an HTML tag, and it is showing you the source of that HTML tag. However, if I dig into the guts of this, okay, I want to highlight this line and maybe tell you what image-URL is, for example. If I dig through this, we'll see the way that Highlight.js, which abbreviates everything to HLJS for scoping, right? We see class name HLJS.tag. That is its way of saying, I have identified a tag. And it creates a span, and a span is basically just an empty tag. It's kind of like a div, except it's inline. Divs are blocks, spans just stacked together. Neither one really serves a purpose, to be perfectly honest. They're used everywhere because you need a name of a thing. So if I look at this span, we can see there's a span. It's got something to indicate it's a tag. And if I dig into the span, I get the name, the attribute, in this case, the string value, right? And this is the way, and we see the equal sign is by itself and the bracket. So this is the way that it's gone through and identified how to type these, data type these things and the aspects of code so it can color code it effectively, right? So that way, if I wanted to redo the way that all of the attributes are done, I can target a class and I get all the attributes to update simultaneously. So it's a pretty clever library. They're using code to parse code to show you code. kind of trippy. However, it's really hard still for me to target. Let's say I want to show you image URL, right? Because image URL equals something. And so I have a DOM node here, span, it's the attribute. I've got image URL, sweet. I've got just a straight equal sign. It's not actually in a tag. It is a special kind of DOM node called a text node. I can target it, but I can't style it. So it's just hanging out, respecting the styling of the tag above it. Cool. And then there's the string value in this case, which I believe I could do. Hey, now that's a number, right? So you can mess with the color coding a little bit if you understand what the API is. I don't think they have such a thing as an int. Oh, apparently they did. They do have a tag for int. Anyway, okay, so this still doesn't solve my problem, even though it's a really cool library and does a highlighting, but it's got a good API. So I thought I'd dig a little bit. And so digging into the core API, I'm looking for something called plugins, modules, extensions, something like that to imply that their code has a way of intercepting and doing stuff prior to it being rendered. And sure enough, there is right below core API here, there's plugin API. And plugin API, which I have kind of a baseline sense this exists because they have themes. Right? So if I can change what the language is, someone had to write something that's able to target and understand the syntax of different languages, which means they have a way of showing different languages. They don't know what every language is on Earth, right? A new language is going to come out in 2 years, and everyone's going to adopt it because it's got a cool name like Rust or Go, or Deno, and then everyone's going to do that thing. So if this is dedicated in scope to just syntax highlighting, it doesn't know what the languages are. It has to be pluggable. Otherwise, it's instantly out of date. So that gives me an idea that it probably has a plugin architecture of some kind where I can use their code and modify it with my own, either with the way I implement the code or actually writing code that extends their code base. So sure enough, they have a bunch of plugins as far as, hooks that you can kind of tie into their code. They show you how this can be done. They actually give a little example plugin recipes. Very, very basic example here of just saying, hey, if you added a plugin, you could do it inline and the name of their code, like where this is executing as far as plugin. I'm making a plugin that is going to run after the element is highlighted. So imagine there's a whole ton of code and it's going through line by line and it's identifying things, that those are the elements. You can run code either before or after it's founded. Pretty clever on their part. So in this case, it says, well, if you find language, there is actually a HTML data attribute that's language, it's data. Attribute called language to imply this part of this document is written in English, this part is written in Farsi, this part is written in Japanese, French, whatever. So I want to capture that. And so they give you a little tiny thing saying, hey, if you do this, you'll be able to capture that value. That way it gets stored and rendered in the output. So again, this is all just implying it has plugin architecture. Because it has plugin architecture, a successful Google finds me most of the solution I want. So in this case, highlight.js, name of the project in question, and then line numbers, because that's really what I want. I want to know what the line numbers are in the code, because in VS Code, this is super useful to just be able to look at, glance, and go, oh yeah, line 34. Hey, everybody, go to line 47. Can't tell you that if it's just a blob, or I say, hey, go look at the thing. So I was able to isolate that, right, to say, hey, highlight.js, line numbers.js. Now, that doesn't tell me that this is an awesome library, but some context clues. It came up really high in a Google search. It's got a ton of forks, some people watching it, and a lot of stars. Again, this doesn't mean it's great code or that it even works. It's just a clue that maybe it does. Just like I had an idea that there were plugin architectures for this because of the nature of how it worked. So doing that fun fact finding game, I can look and see, okay, this has a package JSON that implies it's published on NPM, which means it's redistributed. It has a license, which tells me in this case that it's MIT, an MIT license code. Implies that I'm free to use it. It's an open source software license. You can see they have it modified here, right? To say that I am allowed to take this and modify it. And I can even use it for commercial use, and I can distribute it and redistribute it. And they're not taking liability, and there's no warranty, because obviously. But I can also use it for private use. Basically, MIT is extremely permissive. You can do pretty much whatever you want with it. Apache is the only one that I believe is more permissive. But anyway, because this is MIT, it looks like people use it. I'm going to even bother to click on this link. And I click on this link, and they've got a github.io address, which implies this is on GitHub Pages, which is a publishing engine built into GitHub. We'll at least mention it. I don't think we're going to use it this semester, and we can see that with that tooling, they've been able to build demos to say, hey, here's how you use this. And more importantly, showing the thing in context. So as soon as I saw this, it's like, this is probably what I want right here. So we can see that there's line endings on here, and I can highlight code without highlighting the line endings, which is critical from a usability perspective. And then I can right click in here, and we can see the whole line. So what it's doing is it still has all of its little color coding. However, they are injecting into the plugin architecture a way to take those lines, and whenever it detects an end line or a \n, an invisible character from the keyboard, it's going to take that and say, I need you to wrap that in a table row. And so it takes that information and actually puts it in a TD, or this is for data. This is a data cell in a table. If I go up, you can see it, right? So it's highlighting that and the associated number. Now, the other important thing from not being highlighted is this is using something called a pseudo class or pseudo selector, pseudo object. There's lots of different ways looking for pseudo, something that doesn't exist. And in the case of inspecting, we can see this : before. That means that there's an element here, right? So there's TD, and it has a div in it. I have no idea why they put a div in it. They don't need to put a div in it, but then you can do some styling, I guess. And then there's before. So : before and : after, and things like : hover. These are things that don't exist, but you can influence them to small degrees. So : before is the negative space before this item. It's highly specialized as far as when you might use this, but this is a potential use case. So then if we look at the class in question, we can see that the CSS selector, and it also responds to : before or : before, accepts both for legacy purposes. The class name is HLJS-LN-N, and then before it's going to do content at ATTR and then data line number. So this is a bizarre crossover where CSS is actually accessing HTML data dynamically. This doesn't happen very often in CSS land, so it's a fun little trick. Figured I'd mention it. So reading this, we have a class, use the negative space before the item, which in this case is a div, and the content of that div is going to be the attribute value of data line number. So we can see that there's data -line -number as an attribute on this div. So their code goes through and figures out, hey, this is the 4th line ending, and so put a number 4 there. If I change this to 9, though, it's going to be a 9 because it's CSS. It's stupid. All it's doing is taking what that value is and putting it there. It doesn't have a concept of number. It's just putting it there. So you can see they've also replicated their work here because there's data line number is 2 on the TD. So I could probably clean this up, but choosing not to. The important thing is this can get me a step closer to where I want to be. So where I want to be is the ability to highlight multiple lines of input. So highlight, right? Because now I can do background color yellow and actually highlight that stupid line. See, that worked out pretty well. Or I could highlight the next stupid line, right? And if I can simulate this by just hitting the DOM and doing this and then modifying the CSS, this tells me that I could probably write a way of actually just going and doing this via CSS and JavaScript and HTML. So I went from conceptual, this is not something that can actually be done, unfortunately, because of the way that my current code is written. Oh, shoot, these professionals also missed the boat on this. This sucks. So it must be harder than I'm thinking. To, oh, well, if I find a plugin that takes the code and puts it into this tabular format, I can then actually target it correctly. So let's look at what their code is, because I can modify it and do something useful with it. Generally speaking, when you're looking at a repo, if there's a dist folder, that's going to be your distributed code that's been compiled, built for multiple platforms, minified, which if you're not familiar with any of those words, means a whole lot of gobbledygook. It's just smashed together. Another fun thing, you can see that GitHub uses some other library, in this case, PL-KOS there, right? It's done, GitHub does a great job of color coding things, but they also have a library. It's, I don't believe CodeMirror, but eventually I'll scroll to the top and we'll see. No, it's not CodeMirror, but is in a table-based form. Now, from an accessibility perspective, not to say that I'm guaranteeing this is accessible, but GitHub does a fantastic job with accessibility. So I'm probably right in the right to be using something that takes code and turns it into a table-based format. Again, that's not perfect. We're going off of what my thought process is as I'm going through a viability assessment for, can I even use this? Is it something useful? Is this a viable idea? So it seems like this might be a thing. Now, the other reason that I wanted line highlighting is because if I click on GitHub, it's really nice that I can just highlight those things. So I know it's possible. Someone's written it. But what I really want to look at, I want to look at dist, because that's just, I can't read that. I want to look in src, short for source. And then if I hit this file, we can see something that's at least more readable. This is more, JavaScript. But I can, again, I'm trying to go for this effect. I want to click a line and basically be able to select a whole bunch of lines, because it's really nice looking. But I can read through, and on first pass, I don't know anything about this. I just know it's there. It's code. It's in a license I can use, and I was able to modify the output of what it did to do the thing that I wanted. Again, viability assessment. So now if I go back to here, they have, okay, here's the way you use it. Just copy and paste this. It doesn't really tell me much. So I go and scroll down a little bit in the actual code repo as opposed to that demo site. And I can see, there it is, when to initialize this plugin, right? So they are telling me, hey, go get highlight.js and then get our plugin. So run our stuff after highlight.js. It makes sense because it's extending theirs. Highlight your stuff and then run this function, which is going to magically put the line endings on. So they give some additional examples, say, hey, you might want some styles. So they do a good job of telling me that this is something viable in the first place. So unfortunately, because of the nature of how their code worked, I was able to get it to work. I had to modify it. And so the reason that that's wrapped in some kind of odd looking encapsulation code, if we go back and look, is if you see things like this, like a function, in this case, an anonymous function, notice the function doesn't have a name, and then a brace to open, and that's it. And then a whole bunch of stuff. Usually you'll see the word use strict as a clue, and then functions within an anonymous function, and then some enclosure at the end. In this case, this is saying window and document, like those are the assumed default values passed into this, that it will then be referenced as W and D. If you see code that looks something like this with an opening, this is not modular modern JavaScript, which sucks. So modular modern JavaScript, ES6 and above as it's called. ES6 is ECMAScript, the sixth revision of ECMAScript, which is technically the name of JavaScript. A lot of fun facts today. There was no concept of using code as a library type of a function and packages and things that reference things. That wasn't a thing. Remember, HTML, CSS, JavaScript, this is all archaic underpinning technology that just happened to catch on, happened to deliver the web, and happened to then be the thing everyone builds on top of because there's browsers everywhere that renders it. So JavaScript really didn't become something that professional grade developers could use and share each other's work until like 2015. Not to say there weren't professional things made prior to that. I said share work of. And so the only way you can share work is if you have a modular plugin based system way of passing things around. So if you see things that look like that, functions in functions, open anonymous function like that, this is probably global scoped code that is meant to be run globally as opposed to in a modular fashion. It's not that it can't be run in a modular system. You kind of have to mess with it though. So when I say modular system, this is something we'll get into later in the semester, web components. And so I'm able to pull in JavaScript code from other JavaScript code. Much more Java-esque, right? So I can still reference global scope code, in this case, window. So I can say, hey, window and the HLJS variable is equal to this thing called HLJS. So unfortunately, I had to do a bunch of modifications to their code to make it a thing, but because I was able to do the viability assessment to say, is this even a thing? And then pull it in, we can see that there are lines highlighted here. I was also able to apply some CSS, some just very subtle CSS here. So if I pull this window over, you'll see, right? So I'm highlighted on line 4. If I go to line 3, oh, I want to be highlighted on this and you'll see it. Oh, maybe you won't see it. I thought it would show. There's a hover state applied. I'll show the code for it. But when I hover, you can see that the number gets larger. That's not in the original code. And it very subtly highlights the background. Now, getting into the weeds a lot of like, what should that look like? What should even this default highlighting be? And in this case, you'll see I'm not hovering this text and it's highlighting. So because I can hover and select a line, I can write JavaScript that can act as if I've selected those lines on my behalf, which is awesome. So if I can do those things, I should be able to make buttons, other areas that can react to user input and then tell this to highlight the lines in question, which was the original thing I was trying to replicate. So we're going to go from all that viability assessment land into just do a thing. I get told this all the time, is to just shut up and show me the seal, make it big so you can see. Just do a thing, just do it. Don't tell me about the idea. I want to see the end product. So let's try and wire one of these up. So the way I go about approaching this is make sure close some of these windows, right? I know this is possible. JS I don't need, lit I don't need, lit I don't need. The first thing I'm going to do, because I don't know if I'll finish this now, again, just general process. I have an issue queue where I keep track of all of these things. So I'm going to go to the issue queue, and we are going to say new issue. And I'm going to say this is related to, sometimes you'll see people put brackets at the front of it. This is related to code sample. This is the part of the code I'm working on. Add support for highlighting and line endings. And so I will assign this to me. You could assign it to the other people that are in that repository. In this case, in some larger projects, if they have lots and lots of aspects in them, they're not going to be the issues tab for that project. There'll be an actual repo called issues that's off on its own. And this is so that they can help aggregate things across multiple facets, right? So in my network, Elms Learning Network, which is a kind of an umbrella of projects, there are a lot of other projects that are all interrelated potentially. I don't need issue queues in all these different places. I've got emails from a ton of places. People won't know what to subscribe to. So also you can see the fun. You can see the, man, I work on this one thing a lot, and your class, not so much. We'll call this the summer. So if I go back to my issue, right, I want to make sure this is quantified because I know it's not in the issue queue before I even start it. So lay it out. We should make something like lit.dev where it can highlight text. Code sample is the best place to start. Okay, so another cool thing is if you do this, you'll be able to make a checklist. On GitHub, I've also loaded up a bunch of labels. This is an enhancement. It's definitely around developer experience, and it has to do with community and documentation. Whoops. Oh, geez. Hit the button too many times. Community and documentation. There we go. Sometimes I tag them this way. This is about a very specific web component in this case. So I'm going to say the tasks that I have left to do. All right, so we need to, on hover, we should highlight a line, add line ending numbers, which I've done, but it's kind of reverse engineering it. Ability to highlight from a start and endpoint via stateful variable, and then ability to react to events / update on the fly, something like that. Right? So it's just, again, stateful. I want to make a demo. All right, so that's the general idea of what I'm going to do. I had already laid out, obviously, in this video, which I'll post and then I'll link here. But so I've already added support for the hover and the add line endings. Now I want to be able to get into start and end point to just have it be highlighted. So let's see. If I right click here, we can see code sample has something called highlight-start, which is at 2. Let's make that 1. And then it updates. Let's make this 2. You can see it's automatically highlighting whatever is in there. If I make this like 100, I'm not going to get ticked off about it. If I make this like -10, nothing's highlighted. So I've already done minor error testing there, right? So I can say highlight line 3. And if I just do the end is 3, we'll just get line 3 permanently highlighted. But what I want to illustrate in a demo is a button, or I hover over some text and it highlights different parts of the code, because that's what the original lit thing was related to. So let's take, that's a good one. Actually, I think, there we go. This tag template literals one might be a good one, right? This is something we'll actually get into in class later. So let's go into source code, and we're going to go to not highlight.js. Let's say that there's kind of all that magic that I already figured out. We're not getting into that level of complexity, but I'm working on my demo. In this case, I'm going to look for the word tagged template literal. So this is the tagged template literals demo here. So I have an ID called demo3 in this case, and I rigged up a bunch of logic so that in this case ID3 can be accessed via JavaScript because it's got a unique identifier via HTML, so that I can start to work with this item. Now, in web components, this, the hyphen, implies that this is loading from a custom class, something, classed code that I wrote. What gives that life is, in this case, I have class code sample, extend something else, object-oriented, should be familiar from a Java perspective. But then we have a global item here. It's actually equivalent of window, which is always available in JavaScript, at least on the front end. Window.customelements.define. When you see the tag named, in this case, code sample, there we go, static get tag, a getter. So when you get the value tag, run this class. is effectively the way of reading this code. So imagine there's a definition of code sample and the browser natively understands how to wire those two things together. The code I'm writing, if I write it in the right way, and this front end piece where it sees the HTML and goes, oh, you mean run this custom JavaScript. So this is a unique bridge between JavaScript and HTML directly, where this HTML just sits there unless the JavaScript is executed. We'll get more in the weeds with web components later on. But I want to target this to modify values. So if we look at highlight, start, and end, right? I already have those hard coded up here. So we are going to try and make demo 3 have some way of toggling this, right? So let's do a little div, right? And this div is going to be stop 1. So this is our toward stop 1 because that's what they called their code previously. And on toward stop 1, we're going to say the render function is what you'd expect for lit HTML to render HTML on update of anything that it knows of. So there's no variable in there, but that is an accurate statement. It's a div. I'm going to make it a div, just so we're targeting the div, but technically this is like a paragraph of text. That doesn't really matter, but I'm going to do it anyway just to be semantically accurate. And then I'm going to copy this, and we're going to make another stop. And stop 2 is, notice that we render the styles inside the HTML. This is not standard. It makes it easier to read. So we've got stop 1, we've got stop 2, and then let's do a stop 3, which is just classes will always be used in OOP JavaScript. Okay, so we've got these little blobs of text. If I hit save, we've got, there we are. We've got these 3 little blocks here. So the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to style these so that you can see that there's, something maybe you'd want to interact with. And so to simplify this, we're going to call this stop block. All right. And stop block 1, stop block 2, stop block 3. Now, this is not the best practice, but I'll just do it here anyway. You can write style and you can write script tags pretty much wherever you want. Not the best to be done all over the place. A lot of our code pens will do things that way. For the purposes of a demonstration, it's perfectly fine. But style is a specialized HTML tag that's going to let you type CSS styles that select and do things to the rest of the document. Script, again, a special tag, is going to let you run JavaScript. Now, it says script, but it means JavaScript. Technically, you could run other scripts. It's not super common. So in script, I'm going to do document dot query selector. So document is, imagine this entire thing is rendered, that is the document, and that each item in it, the HTML, is a queryable document using CSS style selectors. I know it's confusing. So let's write a CSS style selector first. So the first one I'm going to write is stop block, and stop block is going to say background color is going to be like a light gray. So that's hexadecimal, so for RGB, every 2 characters. And so if I hit save, our stop blocks, we get that little gray, terrible looking thing around it. Let's do this because this is a live updating environment because of the way that our stuff works. We're going to say padding around these stop blocks is 8 pixels, right? And then there's going to be a border that's 2 pixels solid black. These are going to be display block. Let's do display inline flex. See the difference that it's flex just to the material in question. And then we're going to say width is 30% of the container in question, and they're spaced out nice and evenly there. Let's do display inline block so they run right into each other. Nope, maybe not. I thought they were going to run into each other. Margin 0. Right, there's a bit of a gap there, but this isn't the end of the world. Not really focusing on the design aspect at all. So, all right, so we've got our stop block styled. A query selector is anything I can write in CSS is a valid way of selection for JavaScript. So if CSS is applying the styles there, JavaScript is selecting the item in question and running whatever, performing manipulations as the logic of the machine. So I can, for example, take stop one, document.query selector, and the way I target an identifier is with the pound sign. If it's a dot for dot stop block, that's a class. So I'm targeting the class stop block. In this case, I'm targeting stop one specifically. So it's going to be this item. Now, if I wanted to write a CSS selector just for that, I could say background color is orange, and it's going to make just that one orange, even though there's stop block. Because if I put it here, it's still run, because CSS is short for cascading style sheet. So the cascade is both that it trickles down through things, but also that there's a hierarchical order of what is most selected. So an identifier is damn near the most selectable thing, right? No, it's very hard to beat a direct ID as far as selection. I could have a much less specific identifier like div, and literally every div is going to have the thing applied to it, right? So I generally we don't want to use those too often. Sometimes you might for something like a table, because you have certain browser defaults you want to disable. But stop block one, I'm giving an orange background. Then we'll do on hover of any of these items, the cursor should be a pointer, and background color we'll make light blue. Now, yes, I'm using the word of the color. Nice thing in VS Code, you can hover over this little thing and grab this specific RGB value. If you don't like using hex, and RGB goes through 256, or you can use the hexadecimal value, right? Like I did there, which is 00 through FF. So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, A, B, C, D, E, F. As far as colors, and that then relates to the numerical value of 0 through 256. Or there's some hard-coded ones in the browser like orange, blue, green, whatever. So on hover, right? But it still doesn't do it for orange. Now, if I really want to do, let's make it important. And now I hijack that. The hover state probably is important in this case. Don't use important very often. It's literally just like, I don't know what to do. This should take priority at all times. So as much as possible, try to avoid important. Otherwise, you keep making other things important and importanter, and you're in the same problem of not being able to get the most specific selector. So I'm going to say whenever, that down a little bit, whenever the document runs, right? Those are our styles. Now we're going to apply script as well. So we're going to query select stop one, and we're just going to do, at the moment, I'm going to do console.log. And console log statements, if you right click and do inspect on the document, are going to show up under console. So you can see under console, it's printed out div one, and I can actually expand it and see that there's a paragraph and see the code within it. But you can see it's highlighting it in the document over there. Now, another fun thing, if I right click and I hit store as global variable, and then I push up, I have temp one now. Temp one, I can do temp one dot remove, which is JavaScript for kill this item, and it goes away. You can do whatever manipulation you want that you could manually go and type in the DOM via HTML or do via CSS. You can then do via the object itself. So if I take stop one, can't I store that as a, Try this again. It won't let me store that as a global variable. Oh, probably because it already had a temp one. It was mad at me. So I do temp1 dot style dot background color. So instead of the hyphen in JavaScript, it has to be camel cased, as we call it. So there's a capital C, whereas the attribute in CSS is background hyphen color. So background color, if I just do that, we can see it's not currently set to anything. Even though I can see that it's there, it's not manually set on the item. I'll show what that difference is in a second. So I'm going to set the background color to black, and it will respect that over the other value. If I set it to nothing, back to that. Now, when I set it to black, what's actually happening is I click on this guy. It's writing on a style attribute of the HTML tag, which is a very specific selector, probably the only one more specific than ID, that the background color is black. Now, when I was accessing in this JavaScript, is only telling me this value. JavaScript, in this case, does not know that the background of this is black because of a class. It's just going through things in this way. You can run something that I forget what it's called, like get interpreted styles or something. Can't recall the name of it right now, but you can have JavaScript tell you that that's black in this case by running the CSS. But we're not going to play with that right now. So I can modify this object in any way there. I can also add events to it. So now that I've selected this, we're going to do add event listener. And events is what makes JavaScript so stinking powerful because you can interact with things. Now, there's a couple different ways that you could write this code. I'm going to do it the more modern syntax way, which is add an event listener, which is clicking. And whenever I click, let's actually just paste this in there. So whenever I click, do this. Now, what this is this is sometimes called big arrow, fat arrow, open context. Basically, it's an anonymous function that is assumed to have the data of the event in question. So if I do console.log e, in this case, we hit save, and now I've got this open, right? It didn't console log my thing from before. If I hover, nothing happens. But if I click this, you can see a pointer event was executed, and it tells me way too much information about the pointer event in question. But I can even get where that was specifically clicked. So if I wanted to position something exactly where that happened, like tap ripples, which is something that Material CSS does, stupid, you can use that to generate the ripple. But this tells me much more important things like the path. So this is every HTML item in reverse order that activated off of the click, right? So the click is actually applied to the div. However, I clicked on the paragraph. Now, if I click outside of where the paragraph is to the edge, and go to path again, we can see that it doesn't start at the paragraph. So it's what I clicked on and the path that bubbles up from that. Now, the more accurate thing is target in this case. Path is going to tell you the literal path from the thing. Target is the thing that actually that kicked this off. Now, generally, it's the first item in the path array, P. But by doing, in this case, e.target, that gives me access to that DOM node in this case. And then I can start to traverse around the DOM using JavaScript as a result of having this reference. So I'm not going to do that in this case. What I'm going to do instead is I want to access and do stuff to this item. So that's a code sample, and its ID is 3. So if we refresh and I click now, see I clicked on that div, but I want to start to do stuff to this code block. So if I look in my code for this specific thing, because I want to highlight an area relative to the thing that I clicked on. We'll get into these later when we get into web components, but basically a custom HTML tag that I can define the properties on. So I can say, I want you to care about these things. For example, a link or an A tag, \A, has an href. And so that href is when you click the link, it goes there. Imagine there was guts of code that made that a thing, that said that href does that. And it's a very specialized thing that href does that. Or style, which does a very specialized thing to the item in question. Or an image has an SRC, and SRC renders the image in place, right? There are kind of magic things that occur with these attributes. And so what we'll get into with web components down the road is that those attributes we can take control of and do whatever reaction we want when they occur. So I will skip ahead and say in code sample, I have a highlight start and a highlight end. And I use them by calling highlight hyphen start or highlight hyphen end if it's HTML. If it's JavaScript, though, it's highlight start camel cased in this case. So if I set those values, there's some magic internal to this element. We'll probably review it later. That's going to highlight those specific things. If I set those attributes, which is the HTML way of writing it directly, typing it into the DOM, that's how I got this. It's going to take those and basically update the JavaScript variables, and then logic internal to JavaScript can go take over from there. So I have the object. I have the ability to modify those values. So let's do highlight start and highlight end. Right. So demo3, set to var thing. Be rude with my values. All right, demo3. All right. So demo3 dot highlight start. And what is this about? This says the render function is what you'd expect for lit element to return, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so I want that to start on line 3. And then end on line, the render function ends on 12. Okay, so save. Now it highlights that code in question. There was a time where when I live coded like that, because I don't practice any of these, just as like inside baseball, that I would have been like, yes, it actually worked. But now it's just assumed that it actually works. And then I can have this meta narrative about it. So, all right, now I can pretty much just replicate that over again for stop 2 and stop 3. So I'm going to copy this whole function. We'll do stop 2. Stop 2 is going to grab an instance of that. Another way I could achieve this, and we'll do some refactoring afterwards, but right, so stop 2, stop 3. Stop 2 is, notice that we render the styles inside the HTML. So I want from line 5 to line 9. So let's go line 5 to line 9. I'm going to take out console log of target because we don't care about that right now or anymore. And then the last one is classes will always be used for OOP JavaScript. I just want line 2 for that one. So we'll do start and end R2. And now when I click on that, it bounces around. Again, this is, did not plan this out. I just figured it would work. So to go with what the lit element demo has in place, they don't do clicks to activate these, which is kind of a disadvantage in my opinion. So if I click on one of these, I also don't know that that's what's highlighted anymore. Now, the lit element one is I hover this and it shows me the thing in question. So we're getting into more and more events as we go with that. But so one way that I know in my head that this is wrong, air quotes. And when I say wrong, I mean like I could have done a better job with it, is I've written the same thing over and over again. Right, I've got 3 click handlers. I've got this reference 3 times. So one simple way of refactoring that, I'm going to use a constant variable. I could have used this variable, but whatever. And I'm going to put that outside of my function. Now, because that is global, right, it's not inside this anonymous function. It's in the global script. It should still work. And so now that simple refactor, I've taken away 3 lines. I made it 1. And it might not seem like a big deal, but what if I keep adding events all over the place? The more and more we do these refactors, the more flexible the code becomes, the more it's reusable, the more we get away from what the lit dev team ran into, which is Google engineers, is they hard coded a solution to this problem. That's what we're trying to avoid, hard coding. So this is now just pointing to these different places, and it's going to update the thing in question. So This is hard-coded to reference these. Another way that I could refactor this again is I do function update highlight. And update highlight is able to take the node in question, start, and an end. And so the node in question, just copy these to start, node is going to go there, node is going to go there. And so on whatever this node is, magically, the highlight start is going to be set to start, and the end is going to be set to end. So now if I want to use this, I can call highlight update highlight. I can pass in demo3 because that's the node. So that variable will then be the thing we're setting these on. And then I can do 3 and I can do 12. Now we've gone from what was 4 lines down to 1 line for each of these implementations while still keeping them very readable. I'm a big stickler for readability. 5, 9, 2, 2. And we axe this, axe that, save. Click, highlights, bounces around. There's still too many lines. There aren't, but I'm just. So another thing I think I can do, and I honestly, this is think I can do. I don't do a ton of global scope JavaScript. Is I don't need an anonymous function now. I can just say, hey, go run that. Now, it might actually be dictating that there's an event because I'm not using the event here. So let's see. Nope, it got mad at me. And it got mad at me because it's wanting to pass an event in there. So I have to keep that with this anonymous function for the time being, and we call this. Another way that I could potentially refactor, and I don't, you don't need to endlessly refactor, but I'm trying to show a lot of different ways that we could solve this exact same problem, is because if I want to add more of these, which is ultimately where we're going, right? If I want to add a 4th stop, right now I'm writing stop 4. I'm writing stop block. I'm doing the next thing, right? And every single time now I have to go and I have to write another stop block, and then I have to copy and paste, and I have to make 4, and then we say this starts on line 2, and it goes all the way to line 13, right? Because maybe I want one that when you click it, it highlights the entire thing, right? And so I have the flexibility of each of these individually, and I can write that, but now I still had to keep writing code to get these event listeners. So on the one hand, this pretty much starts to run right into like a huge use case for web components, is making a thing that does all of that functionality built in, even if it's as small as when you click it, it does a thing. But it's not as small as when you click it, it does a thing, because we've already said we want to be able to hover over this and have it do the thing in question, because that's what's in the original implementation. And we can see that hover is not an event listener. It's mouse over, I believe. So whenever we mouse over or click, now we will select that. Now, from a state management perspective, I, as the user, don't know that I just clicked this, right? That thing is still highlighted. So let's get rid of that stop 1, and let's make a class, and we'll call this active. The active is going to have background color of I don't know what that color is. Make it a real color. Yeah, sure. That works. Okay. So we're going to make it a real color. And that is important because whenever something's active, we want that to be used. So now let's go and use that target. So e.target, which was was the event of me clicking, had a target in it. Well, that gives me a reference to the thing in question. I can, through JavaScript, add a class to that thing. And I can get access to that through classlist.add. Oh my gosh, it was such a pain to manage this before having access to this object. You used to have to like manually edit a string. Old person talk. So I'm going to add active when you click the thing in question. And so now it's kept. Now, it also kept it just on the first thing, which was a little odd, right? It didn't keep it on the high one, right? So it's on just the paragraph because I'm not going to do full on state cleanup um, with this, but so let's make that a little bit brighter so it's at least a little more accessible. There we go. You can see the difference. Now it doesn't do click on these other ones. I haven't put that in yet. And so let's do, whenever we click on any of the other ones, right, we get that active class and whatever it is. So that's active. Now that's active. That's active. And you already see a problem potentially. It's making everything active. So we can use JavaScript to solve this problem. I'm going to do document.querySelector active. Not active, it's .active because it's the class is the selector, right? So I'm selecting a class. And whenever I've selected that active class, I'm going to class list.remove the active class. And as long as we put that just prior to making something active, it's going to basically clean up for itself. Now, I'm about to copy and paste this like 4 times, which tells me it's probably not right because I could do it a better way. So in the updating highlight function, and now we pass in a target. We'll call it target. It could be active target. And then active target has its class list updated, but only after we've already removed whatever previously was active in this case. And now we update this line to be e.target. Right, so we've still got our one-line function in this case, and it's very generalized. Right, so let's go and get rid of those class list references. Oh, it should have made it active. Oh, wait, when we hover off, it's going away, or we have an error. Cannot read properties of null. All right, so when we run into an error like this, we can click and see where this line is an issue. And so document.querySelector.active is not being set on the very first run. So this has to be, we have to see if that actually is there. So if that exists, because otherwise it'll be null, then remove it. Now our active state jumps around and remains pervasively after we've moved away from it. So another potential refactor here, if we're getting crazy, we're nearing the end here. So is I want to just select things that claim to be stop blocks and have these things happen automatically. So I'm going to do document.query selector all dot stop block. And a query selector all gives me a node list, which is a like fancy array of items, so that I can go through all of the items that satisfy this requirement. And so I can do a for each off of that. And I could get the index. I don't think that's... I don't think that's useful right now. So let's not do that. So I'm going to loop through all of the stop blocks I find. And then for each one that I find, this is going to give me access to the node in question. Now, when I say the node, it's going to find these 4 stop blocks because they have dot stop block as a matching CSS selector. And then it's going to run through them. And so I'll have this node, then this node, then this node, then this node. So if I have all 4 of those nodes, right, I can then apply the event listener to the node instead of hard coding the reference to the ID. And I can do mouse over, which is going to take the target in question, which in this case will be the node, and apply those things. Or I can do the click handler as well. So I can take this out, right? All the rest is still the same. I still have my nice happy one line. And now I can axe all of those. It should get active applied. Oh, no, didn't update. Oh, my numbers need changed here. So there is something hard-coded associated with those, right? The numbers associated with the highlighting. And so stop one maybe becomes something like node. I wonder what this is in this context. Log this. That's what this is on the mouse over. It's window. That's unfortunate. See if I can trick it. Dot bind. Does that work in context? This is a trick I use elsewhere sometimes. It does not appear to like that. Nope, does not like that. It's telling me it doesn't like it. Yeah. Yeah, syntax error. Okay. So instead of binding that way, I don't think I can pass node in this way because it's a for each loop. Oh, never mind. I can. Okay. I wasn't sure that would work. Sometimes you get into weird scoping issues when the for each loop is moved on at a later point in time. But that's awesome. Okay, so node in this mouse over, right? Because the function runs later is what my concern just was there in my little dialogue to myself. Is I'm adding an event for when we hover over. However, I'm not hovering over right when this transaction happens. It's later. Well, the variable node is being set as it loops through this one time. So, okay, that's awesome because then I don't need target. I need node because target could potentially be that other thing, right? So let's do node instead. And now I'm no longer able to target the paragraph, right, based on what was activating that thing. So that's one big win right there. Now I need to get this information over numerically. So let's refactor our HTML. And this is how these things can all start to play together. One, the word stop one is no longer referenced everywhere. So I no longer need a highly specific selector. So I can get rid of stop all over the place. But going all the way back to our table numerical example, data hyphen starts, I can make up my own attributes whenever I want. Data hyphen end. And so I'm going to actually put the data associated with where to point in the HTML, and the JavaScript is going to read those off and pass it to the other JavaScript in order to make it run with the correct data points in question. So the first one was 3 and 12. So let's do 3 and 12. The second one was 5 and 9. Start is 5, end is 9. The third one is 2, 2, and then 2 and 12. So now I can get rid of these. I haven't wired it up, but I have access to the node that I'm hovering or that I'm clicking on. And so I can get access to those attributes. The way you do that is node.getAttribute. And I call for the attribute. In this case, data start. And then node.getAttribute data hyphen end. Now, I am putting a lot of faith in my own ability to implement my own API correctly here. Because that start and end, if I don't put that in the page, I'm throwing JavaScript errors. Now, so let's see what happens. Oh, hello. Now it's going to point to the thing in question and keep it active after. So we've actually enhanced beyond the original concept, right? Because on the lit.dev website, I can highlight these things and you can see it applies a highlighting. That's a very nice little animation. But if I move away, it's gone. And if I click, it doesn't hold it in place, right? So Now, these items in question, I can hover and it'll show me the thing that we're talking about. And because they're no longer IDs the way that they were previously, right? Let's do some much more subtle application to it. So let's do border hyphen left. We'll do a color solid or dashed, and we'll do 6 pixels. That looks hideous. Dotted, maybe. Dotted. And we'll do padding. So the way that you read this is the number goes up. Right? So top is 0, right is 16 pixels. 16 pixels top, 0, 16 pixels bottom, 0. There we go. So there's a little bit of a distance to it. I don't want that to be 6 pixels. I want it to be 2, dashed. All right, so it's a dash line. There's something implying that there's something weird about this paragraph. And then RGB, another fun thing, you can do RGBA, and that gives you a 4th channel, which is alpha. And alpha also responds to values in an extremely similar way. Actually, you know what? Let me write that as hex. So hex, you got this, but you can put 2 additional digits and it becomes the alpha value. Alpha being 0 through 1 for opacity. So if I do, in this case, like 3, 3, it will fade this away pretty significantly. If I do RGBA and then we do like 30, I should get a pretty equivalent thing. So I've clicked that, that's active. I don't like how dark it is, so let's make this like, actually, RGBA is, oh yeah, RGBA is gonna go with like a 0.2. Sorry, my bad. Yep. So that's what's active, right? And it's a much lighter background, but it's because the background that it's on top of something white, is actually showing through with that. So we can see what's active in this case, right? And let's make this even more subtle. We'll do like a 0.8. It'll be very subtle. Yeah, you can barely tell, right? That's kind of more what I wanted. All right, and then this isn't 0.2. This is like 0.05 out of 1, right? So now that's way too light. You can't even see it. Let's do 0.1. And this is a lot of the back and forth, honestly, with certain design and other code. But now we have something very similar to what the original is. I know it doesn't look exactly like it. That I can hover these things and it shows me the code that it's talking about. Or I can click and keep that active because maybe I wanted to click and select that and be like, oh, what did he say up above? Oh, that thing, right? Or I want to keep that active, but I want to, maybe because it's easier for me to read personally. Oh, display block. Okay, yeah. So, right. So I'm reading through line by line, really trying to get in the mindset of what the end user could use from a usability perspective. It's not just, oh, I made this design thing, right? It's interactive with JavaScript. It's styled well with the CSS, and all 3 of these cycle together. It's why it's such a unique field, right? So after multiple refactors of this code, I was able to get this to be that mouse over and click, do the things in question, update that value, and this is all of, I don't know, like 30 lines, right? But it's cycled through lots and lots of iterations to clean that code up to be in its simplest form. And I'm sure I could make it in an even simpler form if I kept hitting it. Now, the other reason to write this the way I just did is now, because that logic is so generalized, if I take this and I start adding other stop blocks that just happen to have starting points, I can now improve documentation with minimal effort. There's no JavaScript now. If I've written the JavaScript well enough, it's just going to be something I can use. So :host is a very special selector that only works in shadow roots. This is like saying, do this stuff to me, which is nowhere else possible. At the document level, though, there's root, which is the most specific selector. Sorry, not specific. Generic selector, which is sorta like the defaults for the very, very top of the document. That is all accurate, by the way. But imagine I wanted to write all of that as a paragraph. Another fun thing, because the way it's written now, I could write it and have it be 2 paragraphs or whatever. And when I hover, it's just selecting that, right? And I didn't write any JavaScript now to do that. So I hope this was somewhat useful. Try, let me know if this approach of taking something that exists and kind of going through what the full process is helpful. Really trying to nail down this whole notion of like onboarding from not doing web to getting it conceptually. So I'm going to keep making a bunch of these, mixing them in throughout different weeks. But that's a wrap. This is going to be out in production hopefully later in the semester. I want to make it even more generalized than this, but it's been awesome.